thank you so much, Dory and Kenneth, for being here with us. So just tell us a little bit about kind of the genesis of this documentary. I understand it was not your idea, rather it was yours, Dory. So what was that process? What did you really want to tell the audience, and how did you convince Kenneth to go along with you?
Well, I had an amazing opportunity to really get inside the world of Kenneth Cole Productions, because Kenneth and his team came on board a Broadway show. I had The Prom as our partners, our social impact partners, and it gave me the opportunity to really get to know the team and see the work that Kenneth was doing and understand the authenticity behind that, and the commitment, and the fierce commitment. And I was already very familiar with Kenneth's work in social impact, and also, of course, his incredible fashion legacy, but that authentic commitment to cause, as much as I knew, I had no idea how deep it was. And then you shared with me that you were interested in the mental health world, and that you saw the looming pandemic way before the last pandemic, and that you were focused on trying to apply the blueprint from the work you had done on HIV/AIDS and other things to mental health. And I was fascinated by that, and really felt that this was an incredible story that would be tremendously inspiring, and I wanted to tell it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the documentary obviously touches a lot on all of the work you did to bring visibility to AIDS and that crisis. And I'm curious how you are thinking about today, because obviously social impact has been such a big part of your work and the way you brand everything. How are you thinking about balancing branding and social impact today?
So maybe just to give it a little context first. So social impact, I've always, being in the fashion business, you're always wanting to connect with people in a meaningful way. Mm-hmm. And I learned early on it's very hard to do with heel heights and hem lengths, which change every 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. But if I could find a more meaningful way to relate and to connect to the customer, to put myself in their proverbial shoes, so that they would want to put themselves in mine, so to speak, then that would be an optimal business model. But then I went down this road, and it became a very personal pursuit, not just a professional one. And I realized that if I could marry philanthropy, social impact, into the business, and I could not make it something we did, but make it part of who we were, mm-hmm. then we could do it in a way more meaningful way. And first when we took on HIV, started working with Amphar, we did all of Amphar's marketing, we did all their communications, we did all their, we did a lot of the branding and the positioning, and and the whole organization felt embedded with Amphar, and it made what we did so much more meaningful. And then, mm-hmm. but also, I believe if you take certain business principles and infuse them into the philanthropy, they become so much more impactful with very clear deliverables, and with a very clear focus on leverage, on scale, and ultimately on impact, and which typically doesn't happen in the not-for-profit space. So, and you create something so much bigger than the sum of its parts. So that's something that we've always done. I think today everything changes even more so through a different lens through which you look at it. And again, how do we, and the company, we've always focused on wanting it to be ultimately agile, relevant, and ultimately profitable. But those two things need to be part of it first and foremost, and be able to respond to what's happening and how we are processing everything that's around us. So.
But that's interesting. So you think the two are married in a sense, and in a way
they are interconnected. They are infused.
Yeah, more brand visibility, more excitement about something, because people feel like they can support something.
I think it just makes everything more meaningful. And I think business in and of itself, I think philanthropy is often the proverbial hand that feeds it. And I think all business gets there eventually. Either their hearts get them there or their balance sheet. Hopefully it's the former. And I think you realize you need to enable and support that which supports you. And but that's interpreted differently for everybody, every company, every Every individual processes that in their own way. So it's something that we've always done, and I think it's unique in some ways. I'm not sure many other people do it. So I was wanting to tell that story in the right way, and Dory created an opportunity that we got excited about, and I've respected it, work Dory has done in the past, and I was not hard to be sold.
I'm curious though, because it seems like more recently a lot of people have tried to sort of, maybe they look at your success and think they want something similar, but they've focused more just on political angles. And now it seems like that's kind of coming under scrutiny with ESG. What is your take on companies trying to get political, and do you think they're following you in your footsteps in maybe a way that isn't as successful?
So, I have gone through extraordinary degrees not to be political. And people have challenged us on that because we were public for 20 years, traded on the New York Stock Exchange. And shareholders say, well, is it appropriate that you allocate public dollars to political issues? And I would say that almost everything we talk about, these aren't political issues, these are social issues, these are health issues, and that many of which have been politicized, granted, but these are not political issues. And we have been steadfast and focused on certain of them, and there are things we believe in. I think the consumer respects the fact that we have a point of view on certain things, and we don't tell them who to vote for. We tell them to vote, and we tell them what we care about. Ultimately, that I do believe inspires and influences so many of our collective life choices. So what matters, and we've often said what you stand for is more important than what you stand in, and that you are aware is more important than what you wear, and these are certain narratives that we've stood by for 40 years.
Yeah,
that's a long time.
And very interesting. You have the unique accomplishment of taking a company public and then taking it private again. And the film did a really good job. I feel like it touched on this kind of how you had to think about things so differently when you went public. That branding, you felt like was an investment, I think was the phrase you used when it was private, and then it became a cost, an expense once you went public. So how has, for viewers who have not seen the film, how has running this company now been since you've gone public, or since you've gone private again?
So it's been so much better because, as I say in the film, but also as I say in a lot of stuff we do, a lot of the social impact work we do, that it's a difference between an expense and an investment. So investing in mental health related issues right now is a very easy sell because we're not asking you to spend money because no corporation has extra money available on their income statement at the end of the year to allocate to something without a sense of a return on that, of it being in fact an investment that creates a return. And there is unequivocal evidence that investing in certain mental health resources in an employee population increases retention, recruitment, morale, and ultimately productivity. And that, in fact, no matter almost what you spend, you can realize a 5 to 10 times return on that. And you can almost monetize it and quantify it. And so it's easy to sell. But the difference between public and private, in many ways, the public looks at advertising as an expense. As a private business, you look at it as an investment. You look at inventory as a liability. You look at, if it's the right inventory, as your greatest asset if you're a private company. So there are different ways of looking at businesses, and it was great to actually get a chance to see it through both lenses, but it's good having been able to make it to the other side.
Especially for a fashion line,
Especially for a fashion line.
Yeah.
It's so hard. It's so hard. And to be under that lens, we closed some stores, we opened other stores, but we didn't have to do that, under a public lens. And we got to make long-term decisions, which are hard to do sometimes, when you're accountable for short-term quarterly returns and the fluctuations in in the marketplace, which you can't control. So it was a good decision.
Yeah. And when you were thinking about making this film, and I'm assuming you probably talked a lot about what you wanted to accomplish with this, what were the key messages you really wanted people to bring home from this documentary?
So many things struck me about Kenneth's authenticity, and I felt that the fusion of cause and commerce in the way that Kenneth has approached this was a new model, and that it was a tremendously inspiring way to think about a new way of conducting business. And so from that vantage point, I was really eager to give a platform to what you've done in that way. And I also think that the film is so much about having purpose in your life, and what I heard over and over again from Kenneth and everybody associated with the company and people that were tangential was, as soon as they became involved and really gave themselves over to social impact and to helping other people, that their life changed tremendously, that they having that purpose and really helping others was, selfishly so valuable to everybody, but also just made the world a much better place. And so to make a film that I hope inspires people to have purpose in their life and to embrace cause and help others is something I very much wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's what has given this brand longevity? I mean, you've seen a lot of fashion brands come and go. This has survived many decades. So do you think people
I think
are drawn
it's
to
been
that?
a big part of it, and it is the story that Dory tells, and it is one that we're proud of. And I do feel, we set out to make an impact in people's wardrobes, but even more so in their communities and in people's lives, and we're committed to doing it very authentically and transparently. And I think when you come at things creatively, you can find ways to make an impact that you don't get there in the ordinary course. And what we're doing in the mental health space, I don't think anybody else could do. And I don't think no one has done, and nor can anybody do what we're doing and the impact we're about to make. And we're working we built a coalition of all of the largest mental health service providers in the country have all agreed to work with us and to join the coalition. So we've built a platform that is so powerful, and these organizations never have they sat at the table together. And there's so much scale and opportunity that could never have existed before. And now we're working with tech, and we've got they don't work with each other, but yet they want to be part of the solution. They're very comfortably the blame and the cause of so much of the mental health struggle out there, understandably, and they very much would love to be part of the solution. But so we've offered them the ability to do that. So,
which tech companies specifically?
Well, Meta, TikTok, Google, they're all Snap, and we're working on the first set of online standards for young people to help offset self-harm and suicide, which are at frightening levels. Yeah. We already introduced what was called the Threat Exchange, which is a platform where they all, for the first time, share all dangerous stories and hashtags. And so if there is something that's dangerous out there now, they don't just address it individually, they address it collectively, which they could never do before.
What do you think Mark Zuckerberg's reaction is when he finds out, I got an email from Kenneth Cole and he's trying to bring this group and this consortium together? Do you think he's surprised by that?
So, look, I don't deal with Mark, but
yeah. I'm sure he's aware of what's going on there.
But they all want to do this stuff. They just don't know how, and because they're all so fiercely competitive, and they all are fighting for share mind and engagement, and they're competing with each other so fiercely. So there needs to be an outside entity who has no other agenda except for bringing together some force and some meaningful impact. And So, and there's no downside. So, and I understand that there's very real issues, and I do believe today that these algorithms are a big part of so many of the problems and so many of the ills that we're all dealing with, not just our mental well-being and our mental health. So, but I do think that if we come into this thing eyes wide open and we enable everybody to bring their resources to bear, and we're respectful of their individual circumstances, and I think that the only way to make an impact is with them, with their support, because this needs to be so massive and so scalable, so we've been able to make a lot of progress there. But we're also making a lot of progress on stigma reduction, and making it easier for people to talk about their struggles. And we've done several initiatives that have reached hundreds of millions of people. And today, with these social platforms, you can reach people like you never could before. And but I think if we, to the degree we are afforded the opportunity and the ability to bring some of these resources to bear, it's unlimited what ultimately can be done.
One of the challenges that the film touched on, at least, is when you were a public company, you were juggling, how do I go to this AmFAR meeting and then also run a business and get on this earnings call? Do you feel like, since you've taken this company private, that you are able to integrate those things now, like all of the work you're talking about with social impact? Do you think now you can sort of integrate that with the fashion line, or do you still see those things, at least in terms of scheduling, as sort of?
No, it's still hard,
different?
but I don't feel accountable to anybody in that regard, so I can allocate my time where it makes the most sense. So it is easier now as a private company. Everything is easier as a private company. So, we're constantly sitting back and reflecting on the context within which everything we do. I mean, fashion is a relative expression. What's fashionable to you may not be to me, and what's fashionable to you today may not be tomorrow. So, but it's so much of it is related to is your individual context, and a lot of that is how you, from where you're coming and how you're assessing things, and there too, social media defines a lot of that for you, as it does for all of us, but I think everything somehow intersects and interrelates, and I love that we can do what we do, and it's great to be able to tell the story. And yeah, I think Dory had a hard time editing, because there's so much, we're doing so much. I think she did a good job at it. I actually saw the film for the first time when it screened for the public recently. I was reluctant to, I wasn't sure how I would process it, but looking in the mirror. But I think Dory did a great job, and there's so much that we're trying to do and make sense of. I guess it's no different than any of us every day. And how do we make it relevant? How do we make it meaningful?
It is a very New York-based story, obviously. You're from the city. One of the things we're trying to do, as I mentioned with this series, is kind of highlight how important New York has been in innovation. And I also, one of the through lines, and this was such a fantastic story about sort of your start in the fashion industry, was you literally just got a permit for a truck by registering as a production company. So I would love to hear both of you kind of speak to how New York has played an important role in this, and obviously in fashion and impact and advertising and all of those things. It's sort of the center for that. So we'd love to get your take. And I know you're a LA
originally
from LA, but you live here now, I believe.
Well, when I came to New York right after college, and it's when I first became aware of Kenneth Cole, because of the billboards, because of the advertising, that really I learned so much about life and about issues and about what was going on through this fashion brand, which was very unexpected. But it's when I first realized the commitment that Kenneth was making to cause, and the ability that you had to just attract focus to things, give voice to the voiceless, and really focus people on things that were important. And so, New York certainly lent itself to that, and it was all the billboards, everything all around New York, which I was looking up at, being new to the city, and just eyes wide open, that really educated me and inspired me deeply.
Okay.
So New York is a cultural hub, and so much energy comes out of here, and it's very fast-paced, and everything happens very quickly. And I've always believed that in all of the messaging, outdoor or otherwise, that the goal is to say as much as you can in as few words as possible, and because we all essentially have, ADD is embedded in our upbringing, and so we're all multitasking all the time. So, and if you can, think that through, and again, figure out how to succinctly say as much as you can. It's the Mark Twain quote. I'm writing a long letter because I don't have time to write a short one. But how do you succinctly, specifically talk to people? And so New York kind of embeds that in us, and there's so much inspiring culture everywhere around us. Homelessness is not something that always existed. It started during the Reagan-Bush years with the withdrawal of the social safety net, and you witnessed the rich get richer, and then you witness the fallout, which was heart-wrenching. But you see so much of it here in New York as you do in other big cities as well, and I think it's inspiring and it's energizing, and every day you get up and you have to kind of rethink what you're doing, where you're going, and how to get there, and how to make it important, and what you're going to encounter along the way. And so I've lived in New York. People ask me if I grew up here, and I'll often respond, no, but I intend to.
But that's a good one. What do you think are the most relevant takeaways? Because you talk about social impact, you talk about all these things that were relevant in the 80s, and what do you think is the takeaway for viewers? What do you feel like is the most timely
I think
message?
that you can have your cake and eat it many times, and that you can serve the needs of the business, and you can serve your personal aspirations, and that they both theoretically can be amplified at the same time if you do it thoughtfully. And,
theoretically or actually?
I think actually, and I do think that, and I do think it's what everybody aspires to want to do, and we're inherently always frustrated because we're trying to balance. Success has a different interpretation to everybody. To be success personally and professionally, professionally you need to make personal compromises, and sometimes personally you got to make professional compromises. But I do think if you can marry them and layer in on top of that community engagement and social impact, that you can do all of them at the same time, and it can be ultimately as the most fulfilling, I think, equation that I know of anyway, or that I can imagine. And that we're a better business today. People enjoy working here. Our retention is much higher than in most companies. And I do think because of not just what we do, but how we do it and why we do it. And I would encourage other companies to look at the same thing. And you go home at night and you feel much better about what you do.
We're here with Dory, who is the filmmaker behind this new documentary. So glad to continue the conversation with you. Kenneth had to run.
My pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to think there's a lot of pressure like that when you're tasked with telling somebody's story and trying to figure out what matters to both the viewer and as well, Kenneth, what he wants to convey.
Well, it's something that's so cool about making documentary films, because you have an idea, you think you know where you want to go, you have a body of knowledge, what inspired you to make it in the first place, and then, things that you learn along the way and things that happen along the way, you just end up all over the place, and it becomes something else, and I knew Kenneth a little bit, our paths had crossed a little bit, but and I certainly was aware of his world, but there's so much I didn't know. And so as we began to make the film, and I started to learn really about the work that he had done and the risks he took on behalf of his business to really commit to cause, and how fierce that commitment was, it kind of shaped the film in a different direction. And I love that, because you just, there's no script. And so you're kind of rewriting in your head, what movie am I making as you're going along? So and like Kenneth said, there's so much that he's done over 40 years. It's how do you tell this story? And so to figure out how to focus in, what to focus in on was really difficult, because this could be a mini-series that could go on for quite a while.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't seem like fashion was necessarily the main focus of the
Fashion was part of it, certainly, and how he, he's always a maverick in that world as well, and doing things that have never been done before. So, it is very much about who he is and how he lives his life. So it was intertwined, and as you talked about, the pressures of being public versus being a private company, and being able to find a different balance between cause and commerce. So business, his fashion world was very much a part of our storytelling, but it wasn't obviously the main focus.
Yeah. Yeah, well, in a way, it's being creative and launching new lines and thinking of new designs. It seems like it's sort of, in a way, diametrically opposed to running a business and doing earnings calls and keeping shareholders happy.
Well, there's, the sensitivity that any fashion designer has to have, not just about, what is my vision for the next line, but, where is the world today, and what are people, what do they need, and what, how can we make their lives better and easier, because so much of Kenneth's fashion is so, it's beautiful and forward thinking, but it also is practical, and it helps you live your life,
Yeah.
So what is the world today versus 20 years ago versus 30 years ago when he was in business then? So it's constantly changing.
Yeah, I mean, what impact have you seen fast fashion have on his line and the way he creates goods? Because now it's like you're competing with Temu and Zara and all of these other companies that are just creating billions of SKUs each year. It's insane.
Yeah, well, it was less for me about really understanding the details of, what his current business thinking is now, but it was very interesting when he had to rethink, as did everybody, when the digital world came in.
E-commerce,
He had stores everywhere, he was marketing in a certain way, and he had to totally rethink, and because people started to, their buying patterns changed, everything was online, it changed everybody, it changed everything. But it was very interesting to me when I first came upon Kenneth Cole and the billboards and the taxi cab tops and all of that, and how he was able to reach me as a consumer and get my attention. He was really, when you think about it, 40 years ago, doing social media.
Yeah.
It was social media, but it was on a taxi cab top. It really just grabbed my attention, and but it was that same crisp, one-liner that just said it all. It was so clever, and that is exactly what social media is. Today, really effective communication in that way, just a different platform.
Yeah, interesting. So you think sort of the attention economy that we have today, where you have a split second to grab someone's
Yeah.
attention. That was almost mirrored in New York City.
Oh, yes,
4 years
absolutely.
ago.
You know, I'm driving down the West Side Highway. I see a billboard for 1 second, but I get it. You know, I get it. So, you know, it was social media.
Yeah, oh, that's really interesting. No, but I think it is interesting to see someone evolve with the brand. I mean, I know you interviewed Donna Karan, and the documentary, she obviously sold her namesake line. A lot of these people sell their lines. We did an interview with Bobbi Brown. She sold her line, her name essentially, to Estee, and now is on to the next chapter. So it's interesting that Kenneth obviously has been at the helm of his own business.
Oh yeah, very, very much so. And I think that it has a lot to do with cause. I mean, Donna Karan's work in cause is phenomenal. But I think for Kenneth, it's so intertwined, and one is part of the other, you know, and so it would not be logical for him to do that.
Did you ever sense any? Doesn't seem like he's a fearful person, obviously, but now we're seeing boycotts, we're seeing backlash. Obviously, Michael Jordan had that line, "Republicans buy sneakers too." Do you think he's been able to sort of avoid that because he makes it more about human issues like illness or mental health or things like that?
I don't think he's scared of anything. I think he is fearless and fierce and deeply passionate and pursues what he cares about. But he has along the way, and the film goes there. You know, he has hit some walls and he has encountered backlash. And what I've learned a lot from Kenneth in watching how he's dealt with those situations and historically how he's dealt with those situations. He really tries to educate himself and understand, why is this backlash happening? Why am I getting, you know, it's having the wrong impact. People are not understanding what I was trying to say, and but let me learn from it and change. And I think that there was a moment in time where he was putting something out into the world that got pushback, and he really dove in and studied what happened, what went wrong, and that led him down the path of mental health and realizing he really educated himself, and that led to the Mental Health Coalition ultimately. And so, you know, it's not at all fearful of backlash, and then how do you process it and how do you learn from it?
Do you mind kind of sharing with folks how he essentially broke in to the fashion business, and it was by creating a production company, which is such a wild story?
Well, Kenneth, 40 years ago, it's not like this is somebody who just hit the ground running at the top of the game. He was scrappy. He really didn't have resources. He wasn't being bankrolled by anyone or a big company. He had to figure it out and really get his hands dirty big time. And so when there was a fashion show in New York, and it was his first opportunity to get his line out there and have department stores take a look at what he had designed. You know, he's his soul. You know, he was working with Sam Edelman, but he was really just Kenneth Cole, and he couldn't afford to get a booth at the big fashion convention. He couldn't figure out how to break through there because he couldn't afford it, and he was this little new fashion designer, and so he came up with the idea of getting a permit to make a film, because only somebody making a film gets the permission to park a trailer anywhere they want in the city if they get that permit. And so he couldn't get in the building where the fashion show was happening, but he could get a permit to park the trailer right outside, and then create an event around the debut of his line. It was so clever. It was just amazing, and it worked. Because he, as opposed to Kenneth Cole Shoes, he became officially Kenneth Cole Productions, and they did have a camera crew. But as Kenneth says, sometimes there was film in the camera, sometimes there wasn't. But we have footage in the movie about this trailer and about Kenneth Cole, making a movie, which he set out to do to be able to get that permit to launch his brand.
What was one thing you felt like you were able to convey or communicate with this documentary that you haven't been able to in your other films?
Oh, good question. I think that Kenneth is so inventive and just relentless in a way that there's a way. There's a way to figure it out. And I don't know, it's hard to compare films, but for me, personal takeaway and how much I've just learned from spending this time with him and capturing his story is figure it out. There's a way to do it, and be inventive and also be collaborative. He has, his employee team, they've been with him for 30, 40 years, literally. He just builds teams so beautifully, and his coalitions, the Mental Health Coalition, the work he did around HIV/AIDS, he builds teams, and I think that makes what he's trying to accomplish even more successful. And I think understanding his approach to business, to cause, is different than the other films I've made. I haven't made a film exactly like this at all, and I've personally just learned so much from him making this film.
Okay, last question, then we'll let you go since I know we've been keeping you here a bit longer. I thought it was really interesting what you said about sort of billboards being the OG social media.
Yeah.
Are there other things that you think make this a uniquely New York story?
Kenneth has used New York as an incredible backdrop for his storytelling. His storytelling for cause and his storytelling for fashion. And one of the things that really struck me before I was making this film, and then ever since, is that Kenneth typically doesn't use, or very infrequently uses models. He uses human beings that have stories that are, authentic, amazing human beings. And so there's so much of New York and people in New York that are dedicated to being true to who they are, that he incorporates their stories, their New York lives, and into his work. And it's so iconic, his work for New York, because it's kind of the backdrop of everything he does. So New York obviously was a big part of the making of this film. But Kenneth is global, at the same time. Everywhere I have gone and have talked about this film, everyone knows the brand, everyone knows the work, and I'm hoping that after the film gets out there in a big way, they'll know the impact and they'll be inspired to have purpose in their lives like Kenneth has. So, I think his impact is huge in New York, but it's huge globally as well.
Yeah, no, but it seems like that grit is sort of a very New York thing. That's a wrap on today's episode of New York Next. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can also catch us on the New York Post YouTube channel, and of course, be sure to follow us on social media for the latest updates and behind-the-scenes content. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. Join the conversation and let us know what you think.